The RPF is the Rehabilitation Project Force. It is the Sea Org's rehabilitation center in the same way that a Maoist re-education camp is a re-education camp. In other words, it's meant to re-indoctrinate you as a Sea Org member to your Sea Org basics. It's meant to clean you up of all of your overts across your entire life. Not all your dynamics, I should say. I explained those earlier, right? So when you go to the RPF, you are sequestered from the rest of the Sea Org. If the Sea Org is an intense monastic existence, the RPF is the Sea Org on steroids, okay? And how does that look? Well, it looks like you're totally separate from, you're grouped with other people who are on the RPF. It's like a prison setup. You wear black and gray clothes. You cannot speak to anybody outside of the RPF unless you're spoken to first. You can only interact with other RPFers. You have a very exact program of actions to do, which I'll go into. But the schedule is that you get up at like 6:30 in the morning and you muster up and you have 20 minutes to eat your breakfast. And then you get to muster and then you get to work. You do 5 hours of redemption time, which is you working with another person who's on the RPF doing the sec checking, the confessionals, the interrogatories. You're doing those on each other, right? You're not good enough at this point to have a Sea Org member dedicatedly just sec check you. You have to work, you have to earn it. You got to work with somebody else. And you do that for 5 hours a day, confessing all your crimes across all your dynamics. And there are hundreds of questions that you are asked on the e-meter. And so it takes a long time to get through all that stuff, right? It takes months and months, years. And so you do that for 5 hours a day. Then you have 20 minutes for lunch. And then you work for about 5 straight hours. And then you have 20 minutes for dinner. And then you work for another 4 or 5 hours. And you go to bed at about 10:45. Just enough time to get enough sleep so you can be physically rested enough to be able to go on the e-meter the next day and confess more sins. And the questions are along the dynamics that I explained earlier. So first you're getting sec checked on your first dynamic. And so you're confessing to times that you maybe didn't clean your body, didn't take care of yourself, didn't do a good job, didn't whatever on first stuff, right? And then you have an extensive sec check on the second dynamic, which has to do with sex. I think I was asked about 230 questions or something that I had to clear up on the e-meter about sex and family. And these are very sharp, invasive questions, and they all have to be dealt with. Get this, okay? I'm going to simplify something that's really pretty complicated, but in terms of procedure. But the bottom line is, what you want to do is not just get the sins that the person committed, but you actually take them down a chain where, okay, let's say I stole an apple last week. Okay, good. So have you ever stolen an apple? Yeah, I stole an apple last week. Great. Okay, when was it? Where was it? What did you do? How much was the apple worth? Blah, blah, blah. You get all this stuff noted down. But then you ask, is there an earlier similar time you stole an apple? Yeah, when I was 9 years old, I stole an apple from the store. Okay, good. When was it? Where was it? Blah, blah, blah. You get all the details of that. Is there an earlier time you stole an apple? And you end up going into past lives, and you're expected to. And the kinds of overts, the kinds of sins that are coming up as you go back earlier and earlier into past lives become bigger and bigger. To where you're saying, yeah, I stole an apple. Actually, I stole a whole field of apples with my spaceship, and I starved this city because of it, right? Like these get inflated into these great, big, huge.
In your past life, you're committing Holocaust, basically.
That's right. And eventually what you're looking for is you're trying to get down to the evil intention that is in your head that caused you to steal an apple in the first place. And you have to get a very specific, exact evil purpose or evil intention. Was there some evil purpose or destructive intention that prompted you to commit that overt? Is the question that you're asked. And you go, God damn. Let's see, evil intention. Yeah, I wanted to destroy those people, right? That's your evil intention that prompted you over all the eons of time that you've lived to steal an apple, right? So it's not just that you stole an apple, it's what was the evil intention behind that. You got to dig down to that. And this is another one of the reasons why it takes so long. It can take you hours to go down this chain of just having stolen an apple. Well, you're not just saying you stole an apple. You're saying you stole an apple here, and you killed a village, and you did this, and you did this, and here's your evil intention at the bottom of the whole thing. And that's just one answer that could come up to one question. Have you ever stolen an apple?
Right.
And you're being asked hundreds of these questions across all aspects of your life. So basically, you're roto-rootering your entire life. Every single thing you've ever done kind of comes up. It took me 3 years to get through this program. The bulk of the program was this. And you're doing this auditing, this sec checking, the counseling, 5 hours a day on each other, right? I'm twinned up with another RPFer. They're doing this on me, and I'm also doing it on them. I'm also asking them all the sharp and pointed questions and getting all of their evil intentions. So that's why it took so long to get through this bloody thing and finish the program. There's other things on the program that I'm not going to get into because they're just too technical. But they basically, come under the same heading of confessing your sins, taking responsibility for all the evil, horrible stuff you've done. And if that sounds like a good thing, it's not. Not the way it's done in Scientology, and certainly not the way it's done in the Sea Org. Because you're made to feel there's a lot of shaming that goes on with this. It is not a healthy atmosphere. When you're confessing these sins, they are being written up in reports. And those reports are being taken up with you, and you have to do things to make amends. Remember that liability thing I mentioned earlier? That is applied to every single one of the sins you've committed and confessed to. So you have to make up the damage for all the stuff that you've done, and you are shamed and shamed and shamed about all of this. And when the end result of it is to discover the evil intention at the bottom of all of your acts, then you come to have a view of yourself as, holy shit, I've been this really evil, awful spiritual being for all these millennia. Thank God Scientology is here to save me from all of this, right? That's what's supposed to happen through this. But after a while, I started realizing that I was having to make up answers to these questions because I had run out of them, and especially the past life stuff. And in order to get through this program, you've got to jump through these hoops. There were a couple people who were on this program for 10 years. 10 years of their life doing this, every day.
Awful.
I mean, I just can't think of, I guess I could think of some worse mental and physical tortures. I mean, there's the gulags and there's the Chinese re-education camps that exist right now. And those people are certainly having a harder time of it than we did on the RPF. But other than that, I have a hard time finding examples. Obviously, Holocaust survivors went through a harder time than people on the RPF. At least we were getting sleep. That's about the only thing I can say that we were getting was, a fairly decent night's sleep every night. But, that's about it. We were eating slop. We were having to run everywhere you go. And if you aren't producing, like I mentioned before with the call center thing, where if you're not making your quotas, then, it's dropping, give me 20. That was routine in the RPF. I got in amazing shape, actually, because you have to run everywhere. There's no use of elevators. We had to, we were making furniture and stuff, and we had to carry it up and down the flights of stairs because you don't get to use elevators, stuff like that. It was a very, very rigorous program, and I did finish it. I did not, about 75% of the people who end up on this thing leave. They see the light and they take off. I was stupid. I stayed, but I stayed because I had, done this horrible thing to my wife, and I felt very guilty about it. And I did love her. And I didn't mention before, when I was having this sort of phone sex affair, there was one point where we came together, and we actually could have gone all the way. This woman I was cheating with, we hugged, we almost kissed, and I stopped it. And I said, I can't do this. I can't do this. I love my wife too much. I'm sorry, I can't. And that's about as far as that went physically. So that's as far as we went physically. And I stopped it because I'm not trying to like humble brag here. I'm just telling you what happened, right? It was wrong what I did. It was definitely a violation of my marriage vows, and I'm not proud of any part of it. But I think the punishment didn't quite fit the crime. 3 years in gulag conditions was not what I think is a fair punishment for what I did.
You were there for 3 years?
3 years. 3 years and 3 months. That's how long it took me to get through the program. And like I said, there were other people on that program for 10 years. It was crazy.
Yeah.
So I had to confess all my evil intentions across all my dynamics. I mean, I had hundreds of these things come up in the course of the 3 years that I was doing this auditing.
Were you still doing your sales stuff?
No. The RPF is, no, dude, please get me on this, right? You're not doing anything but the RPF. There's no other thing in your life but this.
So awfully abusive.
6:30 in the morning until 10:45 at night, 7 days a week. There are no holidays. There was no seeing my wife. There was no going home at night. You were in separate quarters with all the people who were stuck on the RPF, and your job was to get through it. And that was all your job was. And there was a Sea Org member who was the RPF in charge, and he oversaw the administration of the program and made sure we were all getting through it, making progress on it. And if you weren't, you're getting kicked out. And the mindset of the RPF is not that it's a relief to get kicked out. You're there because you're being given your last chance to be a Sea Org member and make good on your treasonous actions. So you're there under a complete cloud of blame, shame, and regret. And it was 3 years of blame, shame, and regret because I was a guilty, horrible, awful asshole, and I deserved all this punishment, right? For blowing my post, for getting up and walking out after 8 years of intense bullshit. I finally had enough. Nobody else, by the way, in that management unit had lasted for 8 years. I actually had persevered beyond what most people could deal with. I took off one night. I come back. They were furious with me about that. There was no compassion. There was no caring. Nobody gave a shit about me. I let the team down. So then I get posted to do sales, and I start doing okay at that. So they move me up to this other thing. But like I said, I was broken, and I needed a friendly voice. If that whole phone sex thing was caused by anything, it was me desperately looking for somebody to care about me.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not trying to make it sound like it was a good thing to do. I'm just telling you where my head was at. So when I went to the RPF, I was a ruined, broken, almost suicidal person. I was not contemplating direct suicide, but it was there.
Yeah.
And I was literally washing walls, crying. When we were on decks, that's what, when you're running around doing all the physical work, that's being called you're on decks. And when I was on decks for the first month that I was on the RPF, I was a fucking basket case. I mean, it took me a month just to get my head around the fact that I was on the RPF and that this was my one and only chance at redemption so I could be a Sea Org member again and get my life back. As fucked up as my life was, at least I had a wife and I loved her, And at least I was contributing somehow to clearing the planet and saving the world. See, beneath all of this, I still thought Scientology actually worked, which was the only reason I was putting up with all this crap. And so for 3 years, that was my existence, right? There's no holidays, 20 minutes for lunch, 20 minutes for dinner. That's it, right? That's all you get. Every day, you lose track of the days after a while. I mean, Christmas was just another day. Birthdays, just another day. Nothing special about any of it, you know? So that was my existence there. And it wasn't fun. It was rough. It was very rough. And I couldn't wait to get done with that goddamn thing. And I did get through it. I did persevere because I wanted to get back to my wife.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's actually what got me through the RPF.
Yeah.
It wasn't the saving the world. It was the fact that I had somebody to get back to that I loved and wanted to be with. And that was how I thought I could do it. You know, I contemplated leaving many, many times. And the choices that I thought I had in leaving the Sea Org was no friends. You know, I could talk to my family, but that would be it. I wouldn't have any other Scientologists I know. I'd be a former Sea Org member, so I'd be kind of disgraced as a Scientologist. That didn't really seem like a very viable alternative for my life. You know, at least on the RPF, I had people who were willing to help me through it. If I got thrown to the wolves in the big wide world, you know, then my life was going to be over as I knew it. That was what I had been indoctrinated to believe through all those briefings and all the other nonsense that we got indoctrinated with. So it didn't really feel like it was a choice to get through the program. I had to get through it. And that's why I worked my ass off and I did it. You know, it was the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life. Bar none. Nothing else even comes close.
Oh.
You know.
I am so sorry. And just to, you know, number one, thank you for being vulnerable about kind of the phone sex kind of stuff. I mean, everybody's got their dark moments in life, but few people are willing to talk openly about that because it's, you know, we have a society where you only talk about the good and you avoid the bad. So thanks for being willing to be open and honest and vulnerable about that. What a harrowing, terrible thing you've been through. It just reflects this idea of how religion creates these standards around sex and sexuality and other sorts of things that create all sorts of shame and guilt and pressure that then make you feel like it makes you become a prisoner in your own mind because you allow people to do things to you that you would normally never allow them to do to you, but because you feel so broken and bad and dark and hopeless, that opens up the ability for a religion that has its own interests in mind over your own health and healing to do terrible things. Part of what you talk about reminds me of the repressed memory, hypnosis kind of stuff that happened with satanic ritual abuse in the 80s and 90s, where they're having you create memories under the duress and pressure of pseudo fake kind of psychology. It seems like there was a big chunk of that going on with you. But then also just the level of abuse that you endured, you know, it's why I said at the beginning of today's interview that maybe Scientology, as bad as Mormonism can be, maybe Scientology is sort of another next level of cultishness or severity, because I don't think there's anything in Mormonism like what you experienced, other than if you're gay, and if you come out as gay and your bishop or your parents decide you need to go through reparative therapy, maybe in some instances, you know, you're not in a gulag, you're not starving, you know, you're not eating mush, but you're definitely going through some of that psychological torture where you're trying to be cured of something that makes no sense. But it's a next level of horrificness, what you experienced, and I'm so sorry, Chris.
Yeah, it was not fun. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
you know, it was survivable. It was rough, but you know, and of course, I didn't mention. I mean, there's, you know, it's all the yelling and screaming and all the other bullshit. I mean, the stress is quite high. You know, it's a very stressful environment.
Now,
so
what kept you from physically running away? Do they keep you locked in those instances, or?
Well, yeah, you're okay. You're on a Sea Org base, and when you're on the RPF, you are never allowed to be alone. So you're always with other people, right? It may be in the bathroom you're alone, right? But otherwise, you're not. If you have to go off base, let's say you have to go get something, or you have some situation where you have to go to the hospital. This happened often. People would get hurt. I broke my finger on the RPF. There's a guy who lost an eye. There are people who break bones all the time. You have to go down to county to get that dealt with, right? The Sea Org doesn't have medical facilities there to deal with broken bones and stuff. 3 people have to go, right? So you and 2 other people escort you. And you don't get off base through security until you have a written okay from the RPF in charge that you're authorized to leave the base, and that all 3 of you are leaving the base at once. And the other 2 might not have anything to do except hang out with you for that period of time. So in a way, going to the hospital with somebody was kind of a pleasant reprieve for a couple hours. Like you kind of want to go volunteer to be somebody's buddy while they're going to the hospital with their broken bones or something. You look for these little opportunities to have these little moments. And horribly enough, that was one of the times you would have one of those moments, right? You never were allowed to have more than $20 on you at a time, and your IDs, passports, social security card, all of that was confiscated when you arrived to the RPF. You don't get to carry that stuff around with you ever. If you need it for, like, you go to the hospital, you need to present ID, then that person is given one of the people on the watch, one of the people who's accompanying the person is given that guy's IDs. That kind of thing. There's all these controls in place to keep people there. If they do manage to get off the base, and it's not impossible to do, if you walk at the right time and the right angle, you won't be in the cameras, but it's hard to find those places. But if you do manage to get off the base, they're going to figure out you're gone pretty quickly, especially on the RPF, which has so many schedule constraints and controls on it. And then they do then security gets involved. There's a whole security force on the base. They're not private security. They're Sea Org members who are trained to be security guards. They carry weapons. They have training. They are security. They dress like cops. They have, uniforms and stuff. And they go into what's called the blow drill. So you take off. Any Sea Org member takes off. RPFer, other Sea Org member, anybody who leaves, the blow drill goes into effect. This happened when I took off. They check your bank accounts. They check your credit cards. They start calling your relatives. They start trying to figure out, where could he have gone? Where would he go, or she? What are they most likely to be doing? Who are their contacts, right? Who are their friends? Who are their family? They have all this information on you on file. Because you fill out, it's not just in your counseling sessions that you're giving them information. In Scientology, they have what's called a life history form. I might have mentioned this before, where you list all your friends, all your family, every school you've ever been to, every person, every job you've ever had, every person you've ever had any sexual experience with. Like, it's all listed out in this very extensive life history. They have that on file. If you're married, your spouse is going to know your bank passwords or whatever. They're going to wrangle your spouse in. They go, hey, he blew. We got to get him back. Tell us all about him, right? They get all that data. So they try to track you down, basically, right? And they have pursued people and found them at train stations, airports, bus stations, wandering the streets, in the park. They just track people down and they find them. They did not find me. And it wasn't for lack of looking. They just didn't know where to look, because I was literally hiding out at a completely random hotel in the middle of Pasadena. And they didn't think that because my parents didn't live in Pasadena anymore, they had no idea I had gone to Pasadena. So I eluded the blow drill, but that is not necessarily an easy thing to do. And that is something that they practice as a routine action in the Sea Org.
Okay, so that's later in the story, right?
Well, I'm sort of combining those 2 points. You said, what is it that keeps you there?
Yeah.
Security keeps you there. There's
Right.
cameras all over the place.
Right.
There's musters multiple times a day. There's the fact that you're married. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, a lot of control points to keep you in place.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you went through, you said 3 years of that?
Yeah, 3 years, 3 months.
I am so sorry.
2008 or 2009, I graduated, and I got put on to making books. That was a little random, right? And Scientology has its own in-house publishing facility, and I ended up getting posted there. And I worked there for 8-9 months, hated it, found out I was a little colorblind. So there were parts of the job I actually couldn't do because I was making book covers for our books that we were publishing, and there were certain colors I couldn't see. That was a little weird. I was getting in all kinds of trouble for not doing my job right. And turns out it was impossible for me to because I couldn't see the colors right. Anyway, then I got on to doing, I wanted to get away from all this. After the RPF, you're supposed to come off of the RPF as a fully rehabilitated Sea Org member, back on purpose, back on, ready to go, fully determined and all that, right? Well, that wasn't really me. I got through the RPF. But I had seen enough of how the sausage was made at this point that I was pretty disaffected with the organization in some ways. Oddly enough, and motivated reasoning being what it is, I still believed in Scientology. I just thought that somehow something was off about all of this, but I really hadn't been able to figure out yet what that was. I just knew that I didn't like the high pressure. I didn't like the constant yelling and screaming and it just seemed so unnecessary to me at this point. That's kind of where my head was at, was like, I get why all these people are acting this way, but we don't have to be like this to accomplish our mission. I don't understand why Scientology is being run this way. But I still believed in it, and I still thought that it was the only thing that was going to save the world, So I proceeded to continue working, and I got on to doing recruitment. And the bonus about doing recruitment was I got to get off the base. After being stuck there for years on the RPF, no days off, no nothing, I was finally able to get myself out of Los Angeles. And I went to Seattle and Portland and Vegas and Twin Cities, and I went around to different places, and I was recruiting staff members and Sea Org members. And I got pretty good at it. I was doing all right. And I was very, very laden down still, not only with Scientology, but also as a sort of ancillary note here, I was also I had a lot of conspiracy theory, because Hubbard is a conspiracy theorist as well as being a religious philosophical nut. He was big on conspiracy theory, and he had this whole idea that the world had conspired against Scientology specifically, right? That the international bankers weren't just ruling the world, but they knew that Scientology was going to save it, and they were trying to stop Scientology specifically, not generally, very, premeditatedly. They were trying to destroy Scientology. And I had bought into all that. Right. I was, like I said, my critical thinking was still not my strong suit here. Right. And Alex Jones and all of that conspiracy theory stuff and 9/11 truthers and stuff, that was the vein of conspiracy theory that I believed in at this time. And I used that to recruit people and convince them, why they needed to join the Sea Org, because, we were saving the world from this horrible conspiracy. And it worked on young people. It worked pretty well. And I had no idea that I was, peddling a bunch of lies. I believed all this crap. So during the course of the year, though, was the first time I ever started getting some internet access. And I was not going to look up anything about Scientology. I was still ruthlessly self-policing myself about that. But I did start questioning some of the conspiracy theory. Some of the 9/11 stuff specifically. I saw some stuff and I thought, I'm off base. I'm recruiting people. I'm doing the job I'm supposed to be doing. But I thought something might not be totally right about this whole 9/11 thing. And I thought, well, maybe I should look at some of the other information about it. And I did. And I came to realize, oh, no, it's not like that. It's not an inside job. That's not what happened. And I started putting two and two together. And this was the first time in my life since joining Scientology that I actually did apply a little critical thinking to something. And I sort of debunked for myself some of those conspiracy theories, at least the heavy duty Alex Jones, David Icke stuff, right? I still believed Hubbard, basically, but I thought, these details don't really make a lot of sense, and this is not really that great. The reason I'm bringing this up is not because of the conspiracy theory stuff. It's because this was the first time that I had internet access, and it was the first time that I actually applied a little critical thinking to my life. That started a chain.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that was really the beginning of the end. I mean, the earlier stuff had been a beginning to the end too. Certainly the RPF program was, but this was the first time when I actually sort of started stepping away from the church's messaging and thinking outside of that, because this conspiracy stuff was heavy duty amongst the recruiters. All the recruiters were using this. This wasn't an idea I invented. I picked it up from another recruiter who was one of the most successful Sea Org recruiters on the planet. So I was just trying to follow in his footsteps and do what he was doing. And that was how I learned how to recruit. And it was with all this conspiracy stuff. And the more I learned about it, the more I thought, wow, this is really crazy. And then debunking it, I went, oh, we can't be using this stuff to recruit people. This is not true. And I talked to another recruiter and he said, oh yeah, no, I agree with you. And I just kind of stopped using that. And then I started trying to recruit people other ways. And after about a year, I said, hey, look, I'm kind of done with all this recruitment stuff. Can I do something else? And they put me on to another kind of project, opening up these ideal orgs. They're buying new buildings, they're renovating them at great expense, and they're opening up as though they're new church buildings. And this is a big real estate project that's going on, and it has been going on in Scientology since 2004. So I got onto that line. And again, the bonus for me was that I was off the base. I was out traveling. And I was doing logistics work. I was moving people around and stuff. Like, let's say we were trying to open Las Vegas. We had bought a new building. It had gotten renovated. We needed to get it up to like 100 staff members. And trust me, there are not even 100 Scientologists in Las Vegas. So we needed to import some people. So I was the person who was actually doing the physical work of importing them. I would drive to Washington State or Minnesota or Kansas, and I would pack the person's stuff up and move them to Las Vegas. That was my job. So I was driving around, and the big bonus here was I was by myself. And this was very rare for a Sea Org member to be given this much, this kind of responsibility and to be trusted to do this. And really it was only because we didn't have somebody to go with me. Sea Org policy is you never send a person out alone. But I was being sent off alone because I was doing this logistics work, and I was in daily phone touch with my, in charge with the person who was running me. So she was keeping tabs on me, or he was keeping tabs on me. It was different people over the time. And I would go off and do these projects. But what it gave me was I had boots on the ground in every state in the West US over about a 2-year period of time. From Washington State to Minnesota to Texas to California. I was all over the place. And I was loving it because I was seeing the United States for the first time. I was going outside. I mean, I've been born and raised in California. I'd hardly ever been out of the state. So now I was going all over the place. I was actually seeing the world. I was being exposed to the news on a daily basis. I had internet access with a little, plug-in thing on a laptop. And I needed that in order to be able to find things and find people. So the Sea Org was okay with me being on the internet. And at that time, they had not yet created the computer filters that they have now to control what I could have internet access to. So I started in little tiny bits and pieces. I started seeing Scientology related stuff on the internet. And I was like, okay, I'm not supposed to be looking at this stuff. I'm going to avoid looking at it. But some things would kind of slip through. And I'm that naturally curious, voracious reader guy. So some of those things slipped through and started making little chinks in my armor.
Stuff like
and this
what?
was a very gradual process. This was not a night and day, one day I was a Scientologist, the next day I wasn't. It wasn't like that at all. This took years. But slowly, gradually,
what were some of those?
I started learning stuff.
What were some of those pieces of information that?
Little things, like a headline that said, asbestos found on the Freewinds. And the Freewinds is a ship that the Sea Org owns right now that they deliver OT8 on. And I thought, and I knew asbestos was bad, right? So I was like, asbestos on the Freewinds? What? It's just kind of, it's one of those things that takes you by surprise, so much so that you forget to the filters that you have in place, and you just go, wait a minute, asbestos, that's not right. And I read the article, and yeah, no, it was right. There was asbestos on the ship, and we had exposed public Scientologists and Sea Org members to blue asbestos. And I was like, God damn, that wasn't too cool. Somebody screwed up on that, right? I was never going to find out who or how, but somebody screwed up. And that was, like I said, that was just a little chink in the armor, And I already had felt from the whole RPF experience and that whole time period when I was broken and not put back together yet, that this was not the be all end all of existence, the Sea Org and Scientology. And I started seeing that there was more to the world, And like I said, I was having very unusual experiences as a Sea Org member. Sea Org members are not sent off by themselves to drive around, and they are not given internet access. So I was in a very privileged position, right? And I want to stress that because I want to make it clear that what happened with me is not the sort of thing that's going to happen with other Sea Org members as a general rule. So I started learning just a little bit, just little critical things. The word Xenu was kind of around, but I was like, nope, because I believed that confidential upper level material would kill me. I really believed that. So I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And I did not want to endanger my future in Scientology by screwing around on the internet. So I was really trying to be a good Scientologist and a good Sea Org member. And some of these things were slipping through, but they were, I was doing okay. But as time went on, a couple more things slipped through. And then what finally did it, was...
Wait, can I jump in and ask something? So like I was introduced to the Xenu stuff from that South Park episode. Do you remember what year that South Park episode came out?
2005, I think.
And what year are we at with you right now in your story?
2000. We're up to 2011.
So this is 6 years after the Scientology episode on South Park comes out. Mormons know about the Xenu thing, but Scientologists either don't know about the Xenu thing or they know some rumblings about it, but they're scared to think about it or talk about it because of this perception that they're going to die if they talk or think about it?
Yes.
And again, remind us, you mentioned this before. How do you come to believe you're going to die if you think or talk about the Xenu thing?
L. Ron Hubbard said so. He specifically said it in the Xenu narrative. I mean, it's written in the materials, and that little bit is passed on. You're not told. How do I put this? Different people have different experiences with this, okay? But basically, you are indoctrinated in Scientology that the upper levels of Scientology exist. You know all about them. You know that they're there to be done. But you don't know a single thing that is on them, that's in them. You don't know the contents of those levels at all. And you are told over and over again that it is extremely powerful information, that if you're not ready for it, you can get sick or you can die. or other horrible things can happen to you spiritually that you just don't want happening to you. So it's just kind of understood. I mean, it's very quickly understood in Scientology that that's not for you yet. And if you're not ready for it, it's dangerous. You're told that there's this area of the grade chart between the level of clear and OT3 specifically that is called the no interference zone, where all you're supposed to do as a Scientologist after you go clear is get your ass to OT3 as fast as possible, because you are in spiritual danger if you don't hurry up and get that done. I mean, that's how it's written. So there's all this mystique and sort of cultural lore in the world of Scientology connected to these OT levels. So you just come to an understanding that until you're ready for it, you don't want to look at that stuff. And when you're ready for it, they'll give it to you, but you got to get yourself up to a level where you're going to be ready for it. Because if you're not, you're just going to be damaging yourself and potentially worse. So that was my understanding of it as a Sea Org member.
And again, we covered this in the earlier episodes, but that's very reminiscent of the Mormon temple ceremony and the endowment ceremony and even the second anointing and the death oaths that we would reenact as Mormons to make us fear ever divulging these top secret things that really weren't that interesting or real or valuable. But the church needs sacredness. They need things at the pinnacle of their ritual or theology that can be sacred. And the only way to make them sacred is to have these super harsh penalties if anybody divulges or reveals them. And the Masons did it too, and it sounds like that's what you guys did. But the other point that's just mind blowing, and I get this in Mormonism still in 2019, we can have Mormon stories existing for 14 years. We can have CES letter existing for 7 years or however long it's been out now, maybe 6 years. We can have Fawn Brody's book going back to 1945, but still the vast majority of Mormons are oblivious to all of it. And that's how it is in Scientology as well. Exactly.
It's sacred lore, and you just buy into the rules of it because those are the rules. You don't know what it is. There's endless guessing game within the lower levels of Scientology as to what OT3 and the OT levels are all about, right? Endless numbers of guesses. I spent years conjecturing what it could all be about. And I studied and studied and studied everything I could get my hands on that Hubbard had talked about that wasn't confidential in an effort to try to reverse engineer or figure out what it could be. I mean, I was glued to this thing. This was something I was introduced to very early on as a Scientologist. And I am not big on mysteries, you know what I mean? Like, I want to know. I don't savor the anticipation of finding out. I want to know. I want the spoilers, I want to know. Yeah. So for 27 years, right, I had been like glued to this mystery of what is OT3. So, I was trying to figure stuff out, but I was still believing that I needed to police myself on this stuff, right? So I didn't want to know. I wanted to know, but I wanted to find out the right way.
And again,
Mm-hmm.
So this South Park episode that blasts Scientology, deep secret theology to the whole world existed 6 or 7 years before your awakening.
Correct.
Okay.
And I did not watch it because I knew I'd only just sort of heard that it had happened. Not when I was in the RPF when it happened, because I was obviously not connected to the outside world. I had no clue what was going on. But when I got on the internet, I heard that South Park had done this episode and that Isaac Hayes had quit the show as a result. Well, I was on the Scientology side. So for me, Isaac Hayes was the hero of that story. Trey and Matt were a couple of dicks, right? That was my view as a Scientologist. So I didn't want to have anything to do with that South Park episode. I wasn't going to watch that thing. Right. Just a bunch of lies, just a bunch of crap.
And what did you think about, what did you think about all the stuff? Did the stuff with Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, did all that come out while you were still a Scientologist?
The couch jumping stuff did. That all happened, again, while I was on the RPF, actually. And I didn't see any of that when I was on the RPF. I had no idea any of that had happened. So I was a couple years late finding out about Tom Cruise's craziness. Tom Cruise, to me, was a Greek god. Tom Cruise was the most important Scientologist on the planet next to David Miscavige. Tom Cruise was a massive superstar celebrity who was spreading the word about Scientology. Tom Cruise was not somebody I was having critical thoughts about yet.
Got it.
You know?
Yeah.
Because I was in that world.
Yeah.
You know, and Tom Cruise was the Freedom Medal of Valor winner. I mean, he got the biggest freedom medal that David Miscavige had ever given out. I had not appreciated, and no one in the Sea Org appreciated David Miscavige standing on that stage saying that Tom Cruise was the most dedicated Scientologist he knew. That shit pissed us off because we were Sea Org members, and Tom Cruise might be a hardworking celebrity and superstar actor, but he ain't no Sea Org member.
Right.
And that line that David Miscavige stood on stage and said disaffected more Sea Org members than I think he ever had a clue was going to happen. People in the Sea Org were pissed off about that.
Wow.
But we had to suppress it all because you do not ever express a critical remark about David Miscavige as a Sea Org member and expect to get away with it. You will not.
And in Miscavige's defense, you live by your celebrities and you grow by your celebrities, but you can die by your celebrities, as Mormonism is now experiencing. Tyler Glenn leaves Mormonism, Dan Reynolds leaves Mormonism, Imagine Dragons leaves Mormonism. Like it's, all these movie stars are leaving. Like it, the Osmonds were great when the church was on the rise. But if your celebrities start speaking out against the church and start disaffecting, you can die by that same sword that you've been living by. And so I'm sure Miscavige had to kiss Tom Cruise's butt to keep him in. Really quickly, there are rumors that the way that Scientology keeps Cruise in is by having secret information that he's gay, and that they'll use that against him if he ever disaffects. Do you have any sense for any of that being true or not?
No, that's all bullshit. Tom Cruise is a religious fanatic. He is a true believer. He is absolutely a true believer.
And John Travolta too?
John Travolta? Maybe.
Okay.
I at this point, I don't have any question that John Travolta is probably bisexual. I was around in Santa Barbara when John Travolta met Kelly, his wife.
Kelly Preston, right?
That all happened in Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
And Kelly got into Scientology in Santa Barbara because John Travolta was friends with a couple of the staff members there in Santa Barbara. So that's where she went. I'm convinced that he loves his wife and that he has a family and he loves his family. John Travolta is not an insincere person.
Mm-hmm.
He loves Scientology, but he also was disaffected with Scientology in the 1980s before he met Kelly, and he got recovered back into the church.
Okay.
And I think he's had a few other moments like that. So he's been on the fence about Scientology here and there, right? Now he seems pretty diehard, and I think the reason is because his wife, Kelly, is fanatical about Scientology. She didn't just get converted, she got super converted. And so I think the thing that's keeping John Travolta in Scientology is his wife.
Okay.
So then blackmail about his bisexuality. Tom Cruise is definitely not bisexual or homosexual. That's just not, there's no way that's true. And he is just a fanatic, he's this super intense personality. And he's one of these like gung-ho, if you're going to do it all the way kind of people. He met Nicole, whose father is a clinical psychologist, by the way. He met Nicole Kidman on the set of, Days of Thunder. He was married to Mimi Rogers, who was a second-gen Scientologist who got him into Scientology. He had fallen out of love with Mimi. He fell in love with Nicole, wanted to marry her, right? Wanted to be with her. So, the church complied and helped make that happen and told Mimi to shut the fuck up. And that's what happened. And that's how he got out of his first marriage. But Nicole wasn't really so down with Scientology. She did it, and I think she even got up to the OT levels at one point, but she was never really hardcore. She was kind of doing it because he wanted her to. And she was kind of pulling him away from Scientology. And in the 1990s, he actually stopped really being much of a Scientologist. He wasn't promoting it. He wasn't talking about it. He wasn't doing services, wasn't around the orgs. Sure as hell wasn't going to events. Late 1990s, David Miscavige says, I want to get this guy back. And Marty Rathbun goes and recovers him and does the most successful Scientology recovery ever happened in the history of Scientology. He gets Tom Cruise back on board. And he gets Nicole out of Tom Cruise's life. He actually accomplished that. And he managed to alienate the kids that they had adopted as well, so that they went on Cruise's side and not with Nicole. And Nicole was like, okay, so she got blindsided and ended up divorcing Tom. And Tom went all in on Scientology. And he and David Miscavige became best buds. And Tom started getting more training in Scientology, started doing more classes with Scientology, started doing more auditing with Scientology, got onto the OT level 7, which I think he's still on now. He might have finished that. And he went all in on Scientology again. And then they arranged Katie Holmes to be his wife. And then that didn't work out because Katie saw behind the curtain and she was like, get me the hell out of here. And she actually arranged with her family with secret phones and secret security and stuff to escape from Tom Cruise's vicinity with her daughter. And she did, and she pulled it off, and she got out of that. And Tom, of course, never forgave her and won't even see his daughter now. And that's why, so he's as hardcore as they get. And people who conjecture endlessly about Tom Cruise leaving Scientology literally just don't have any idea what they're talking about. He's never going to leave.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's Tom's situation. So, okay, so let's wrap this up. So, in 2011, something really, really important happened. Actually, two things happened.
8 years ago.
Yeah.
All right.
This is at the end of 2011. I had been out and about for a couple years now, off the base, because I hated being on the Sea Org base. It was nothing but pressure and yelling and screaming, and I didn't want anything to do with that anymore. So I was kind of keeping myself on these projects, traveling around, doing this work, having a good time, enjoying the work that I was doing, kind of. I mean, sort of. It's not a lot of fun to go knocking on doors and having people yell and scream at you. That's not a lot of fun. And that happened often. But sometimes I would get people back in the fold, and I was getting pretty good at that job. But I was becoming more and more aware of how money intensive Scientology had become. I was working on a project in Twin Cities, Minnesota, at the newly opened Scientology church there. They bought this 90,000 square foot museum and converted it into a Scientology church, which is where it's at now, in St. Paul. And we were there to get the place going and get the staff producing and stuff like that. But the only orders we were receiving were pretty much all aligned with making money, not bringing new people in, not selling books, not getting people in class, not getting auditing delivered. It wasn't about any of the things that Scientology was ostensibly actually about. It was only money, 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 right? And I didn't like that. I thought, this is way off. Scientology's always had this thing about money, and I knew that. But now there was nothing else but money. That's all we were talking about. And I thought, well, this is wrong. And I started examining my life, and I started thinking, okay, I've done the RPF, I'm married, I'm in the Sea Org. I am not enjoying myself a whole lot. And it dawned on me, kind of out of the blue, as I was sort of thinking about this stuff, that I had gotten into this patter, the sales speech, when I was recovering people or talking to them or dealing with them, And that sales thing that I had sort of developed or been using was really a bunch of lies. And I had developed it along the lines of hopes, well, let's get you back in and we'll make it go right. We'll do this and we'll do that and it'll all work out. It'll be great. But I had seen behind the curtain enough now that I knew that it wasn't all great and that people were getting screwed over and it was really just about the money. And I started being concerned about getting people in because I knew that they were just going to be jumped all over for money. And I was trying to sell them on, no, we're going to get you back in. We're going to fix your life up. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. But that's not what would happen with them. They'd come in and it was all about the Benjamins, right? And I thought, what am I doing? What's going on here? I'm actually lying to these people. That's what's happening. I'm getting them back in the door by lying to them. And I don't want to lie to people, And I still had enough integrity to know that lies were wrong, and that's not what I got into this whole thing for. And then on New Year's 2011 to 2012, a very, very important former Sea Org member who had been very high up, who had run the Clearwater installation for a while, for many, many years, in fact, her name was Debbie Cook, sent out an email, a very long and very extensive email with all kinds of L. Ron Hubbard quotes in it that showed how off the rails the church had gone and that it was all about the money. And David Miscavige wasn't doing anything to actually run Scientology the way L. Ron Hubbard wanted him to. He was all about money, and it was ripping people off. And this whole thing about buying buildings and renovating them, Hubbard never said to do that. That was totally wrong, contrary to his policies. And there was all this money that they were just holding on to in reserves, and they weren't spending it, and they weren't using it to promote Scientology. They were just amassing money. And there was lots of other things in this email, and it was a nuclear explosion in the world of Scientology because Debbie Cook was somebody who people knew and trusted because she had run the Florida place for so long, the flag. So everybody knew who Debbie Cook was. She'd been in videos. She had talked about Scientology. So here she was sending out this email saying, the current leadership of Scientology is off the rails. And here's what L. Ron Hubbard has to say about it. And here's how David Miscavige is violating all of that. And I could not deny a single word that she had written in that email. And I saw it and I went, oh my God, right? It validated everything I'd been thinking. Suddenly I had somebody somebody else was saying what I was seeing. And I had tried to talk to my wife. She didn't want to hear anything about it. She thought I was a disaffected asshole. And how dare I even question Miscavige, right? So my marriage was not a safe place for me to go anymore. There were other Sea Org members. I couldn't talk to them about any of this stuff I was seeing. They didn't want to hear it. So I was feeling pretty alone until this email drops. And I'm like, damn, I'm not the only one seeing this. I'm not the crazy one. And that was really the real, like, okay, right? I'd been thinking about it and pretty much decided I was going to leave the Sea Org. Again, I still believed in Scientology. I just thought the organization had gone off the rails and it was all about the money at this point. So I didn't want to be a part of that, but I still wanted to do Scientology because I still thought the secrets of the universe were on those OT levels. So I decide I'm leaving the Sea Org. Basically, I get called. I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of other details right now. I'm just going to go to wrapping this up with, I got called back to LA. I submitted my resignation, basically. I wrote up a thing before I even arrived in LA, and I said, I want to leave the Sea Org. I don't want to argue about it. I don't want anybody trying to convince me to stay. I just want to go. And this, of course, was a bit of a bomb. And, they weren't happy with me at all. But it took me about 8 months. This was March 2012, January, February, March, April, May. I think it was April. I think it was April or May that I went back to LA. And it took me until December to get through the sec checking and then jump through all the hoops that I needed to jump through so that I could leave the Sea Org and still be a Scientologist in good standing. And that was important because if I just took off I'd be in trouble. I'd be blown, and they would not let me continue doing Scientology. So I wanted to do it and jump through all their hoops. So I did. And by December 2012, I was out of the Sea Org. And I went back to my mom's place in California. And I landed there. She gave me a place to land. She was very happy. I found out she was totally out of Scientology at this point, couldn't care less about it, didn't want to, was happy to have me around, was happy to talk to me about it and stuff. But, she wasn't interested in doing any more Scientology. And I was totally okay with that. I got it. And I wanted to, but I was going to get a job. I was going to have a family. I had a whole idea for how my life was going to go. And I ended up going back to Minnesota because I had friends there, and I'd met this woman, and I thought we were going to make a life. And I was divorcing my wife at this point, right? We had been apart for years, and the marriage had really just fallen apart. I mean, the RPF she's the thing that kind of got me through the RPF as a goal. But after I got back with her, it really wasn't that great, And I had done, my punishment had definitely, overqualified for the crime I had committed, right? So I didn't feel guilty anymore about what had happened. I felt like I had dealt with it and taken responsibility for it. So I didn't feel like I was in a bad, propitiative place with my marriage. I wanted to make it work, but it really wasn't working. And no matter how much I tried to make it work over all this time, it wasn't working, and it was just kind of fading and falling apart. So by the time that this email came and my examination of Scientology came, my marriage was basically over, and I was fine with that. And it wasn't a big, huge loss like you would think it might be for some people. So, so I went back to Minnesota to set up a new life, make a life for myself. I'd gotten a car at this point. My mom had helped me, stabilize some things. I got, opened up a bank account, et cetera. And I was actually kind of normalizing, and I had been used to driving all over the place, right? From all those years of driving around in the West US. And I was pretty familiar with how to drive across, the United States. So I drove from California to Minnesota in my new car, and new used car, and threw all my stuff in the back because I had hardly anything in terms of material possessions. The Sea Org, the lifestyle is very utilitarian, minimalist lifestyle. I did not have, I had given my ex-wife the CDs and everything. I didn't keep anything really except a laptop. And I went out to Minnesota. And when I landed in Minnesota, in fact, before I got there, Sea Org members who were in Minnesota, who I had been working with back in, months and months ago, heard I was coming, and they were furious. They were so pissed because I was now showing up as a non-Sea Org member. And how dare I have a life outside the Sea Org and show up again as though I was just a regular person, right? This was the attitude. And so I was refused entry to the org. I could not do Scientology services. I could not do any Scientology related stuff. I wasn't even supposed to be Facebook friends with people. That's what the church demanded of me as an ex-Sea Org member. I was out of the Sea Org. I was done with that. I was now a public Scientologist. I was no longer working for the church, and yet they were still making these incredibly invasive demands on me about who I could talk to, who I could be friends with, who I could go out with, what I could do in relation to the Scientology church. And I wasn't really very happy about that, but I was trying to play ball because I wanted to make it go with this woman I had met, and she was a Scientologist. She was actually a staff member at the church. That's how I'd met her. And I thought we could make something happen. I was falling in love with this woman, and vice versa. And we were, kind of making it happen. But we had to do it secretly because Scientology demands that, because if you don't kowtow to Scientology's demands, then they make life horrible for you. So the Sea Org was really, really pissed at me for going back to Minnesota, and they were not, being very nice to me. And I thought, okay, I think I've had about enough of this. And I started going online because I knew there was stuff I didn't know, and it was time for me to find out. And I had heard a couple of things. I'd seen a couple of things over those years when I had internet access. I'd been a really good chicken. I had really not looked at a lot of stuff. But now the brakes were off, and it was time to actually find out. And I dived all the way in. And it took me 3 months. I mean, late nights, I was just horrified, fascinated. I just could not believe the stuff I was reading. I found out about L. Ron Hubbard's actual life. I found out about how he never saw combat, how he flunked out of college, how he was a pathological liar, how he was married to 2 women at the same time. We didn't even know about the second wife. Like, I didn't know anything about that. As a Scientologist, you're fed this entire biography of Hubbard that is total bullshit. And that was the version we believed because that's all we were told. I come to find out, no, that's not the actual version of his life that's true. And there's a lot of Scientology that rests on some of Hubbard's life story being true, and it's not true. Like the combat thing in World War II. He didn't have any combat wounds. Well, he claimed that Dianetics was what allowed him to cure himself of his wounds. So if that's not true, Dianetics isn't true. That was not an easy pill to swallow. Not after dedicating my life to this stuff for 27 years. And I'll never forget the moment that it actually clicked. It was about 3 months in. 2 or 3 months, I'd gone down all these rabbit holes, learned all this stuff, heard from Sea Org members that had left who I used to know. I mean, this was not all divorced, third person stuff. These were people I had worked with who were telling their stories online and stuff. And I was like, oh, that's what happened. That's what happened to that guy. That's what happened at that time. And seeing all that, it all kind of fell into place, and I realized that I had been taken advantage of and that I had just been being used all those years to make money. And that it had all been built on a lie, that the Thetans weren't true, the reactive mind wasn't true, Dianetics wasn't true, Scientology was mostly stolen from other places and other sources, that L. Ron Hubbard was not a creative genius, he was a plagiarist and a liar. And that was... what words do you use to describe that? How do you describe finding out that your entire life has been a lie? It's not like I got into Scientology like everybody else did. You know what I mean? I was a second gen. I was raised with this stuff. It was never a question that we were Thetans. It was never a question that we were going to live into eternity. And now suddenly, no, all that's a lie. Your entire worldview, everything you think about yourself is not true. And that was tough.
Yeah. And of course, Mormons now are going to be connecting with what you're saying more than probably anything else, because we do have that rabbit hole moment where we go down the rabbit hole. We get to the point where we're willing to question whether or not it's actually true. And then we use the internet and podcasts and other sources to start learning. And then we learn the hundreds and thousands of things that the church hid from us, the disturbing truths about the church that weren't true. And all of a sudden, everything that we've built on our entire life upon now falls to the ground, and we're naked and groundless, after decades and decades and decades of service and commitment and devotion to an organization.
Exactly. That's what I experienced too.
Yeah.
And having risen in Scientology up to the highest levels in the Sea Org, having gone through the RPF program, having gone through everything I went through, having gone suicidal, having gone through, being in a headspace where I literally thought I was ready for the funny farm, right? I mean, I had been in some very dark places. And I had gotten through all of that on the hope and promise that Scientology was what it said it was, So, yeah.
And this is
it was
where,
earth-shattering,
And just those reflections of L. Ron Hubbard being a plagiarist, just grabbing stuff from all around him and deceiving people. That's exactly what we learn about Joseph Smith by the time we're done studying, was that he was simply grabbing stuff from Swedenborg, grabbing stuff from the Masons, grabbing stuff from the temperance movement, and whatever it is that was in his air, he was munging it all together, repackaging it, selling it as Mormonism and as divinely inspired. And he was a plagiarist. I mean, Book of Mormon, Book of Abraham, any revelation he came up with was plagiarism. And anyone who studies it with an open mind reaches that conclusion. So I'm seeing lots of comments now. Rochelle says, we feel your pain. Thomas says, wow, Chris, what you just said just gave me the chills, because that's exactly how I felt. Everything I knew and that I was, the way I understood the world, was all a lie. Thomas writes, I'm sorry for the pain you've experienced. I look up to you, and I know many others must as well. Rochelle says, sounds like the old fraudulent foundational stories and truth claims. Deb writes, the parallels to Mormonism are fascinating. And it's so powerful and heart-wrenching to reach this point in the story, and see that our journeys have paralleled your journey in such profound and heartbreaking, but also validating and let's just say liberating ways. And so here's what I want to do. We're now 4 hours into today's interview. We've done 6.5 hours, and I don't want to be done yet. I need to be done for today, but I still want to cover your life as an ex-Scientologist.
I think that's a great idea.
So
I think that's great, man.
Would you be okay if we did one more interview, even though we thought we were going to be on today?
Absolutely. It works for me too. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, because I don't want to rush this very important part, because so many people discover it's not true, but then what do you do afterwards? And
exactly,
so many other religions are dealing with this of like, okay, yeah, now tens of thousands of us know it's not true, but what do you do afterwards? How do you hold the church accountable? What do you do when the church attacks you for holding it accountable? What's it like trying to minister? What's it like to try and be a truth teller to your former organization? What does the church do to you? And then where do we go from here? And all those things, I don't want to rush.
Agreed. I don't want to either, because I actually have a lot more to say about my post-Scientology life. And I think there are some important things there that I can help people with. So I would very much like to have a dedicated time to do that. I think that's great.
All right. So everyone, that's 4 hours today with Chris Shelton, followed by 6.5 previously. You're going to break Roger Hendricks' record and exceed the 12-hour mark in a One Mormon Stories sequence of interviews. But I think it's been worth it. You're that awesome, Chris Shelton. No offense, Roger Hendricks. And so you're awesome too, Roger. So Chris, we're going to bring you back for a final round. Is that all right?
Awesome, man. Look forward to it.
All right. Keep up the great work, Chris. We'll see you soon. All you listeners, thank you for joining us. Thanks for your support. For those of you who support Mormon Stories Podcast and the Open Stories Foundation, thank you. For those of you who don't, please, if you like this programming, please go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button, become a monthly donor. It makes all the difference. Chris, if people want to check out your books or your YouTube or your website, where do they go?
mncriticalthinking.com is my blog, and YouTube, I'm under Chris Shelton. So look up my channel as Chris Shelton.
All right. You're awesome, Chris. We appreciate it. Thanks to all listeners. And please join us again soon for more on Mormon Stories Podcast. We hope to interview Chris in the next few days to finish all this up. Take care, everybody. Talk to you soon.